My friends, sometimes the most radical thing is to be confronted with our own standards, to be asked simply that we live up to the principles we profess. Even in the most idealistic of nations, we don't always take kindly to being reminded of what more we can do, or how much better we can be, or who else can be induced in the promise of America included. We can be slow as well to give greatness its due. A mistake I myself made long ago. When I voted against a federal holiday in memory of Dr. King. I was wrong.
We all make mistakes.
I was wrong and eventually realized that in time to give full support for a state holiday in my home state of Arizona. I'd remind you that we can all be a little late sometimes in doing the right thing. And Dr. King understood this about his fellow Americans. But he knew as well, in the long term, confidence in the reasonability and good heart of America is always well placed. And always that was his method in word and action, to remind us of who we are and what we believe. His arguments were unanswerable and they were familiar. The case always resting on the writings of the founders, the teachings of the prophets, and the word of the Lord. Perhaps with more charity than was always deserved, he often reminded us that there was moral badness and there was moral blindness, and they were not the same. It was this spirit that turned hatred into forgiveness, anger into conviction, and a bitter life into a great one. He loved and honored his country even when the feeling was unreturned, and counseled others to do the same. He gave his fellow countrymen and his fellow Christians the benefit of the doubt, believing, as he wrote, that returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Only light can do that. I remember first learning what had happened here on the 4th of April, 1968, feeling just as everyone else did back home, only perhaps even more uncertain and alarmed for my country in the darkness that was then enclosed around me and my fellow captives. In our circumstances at the time, good news from America was hard to come by. But the bad news was a different matter, and each new report of violence, rioting, and other tribulations in America was delivered without delay. The enemy had correctly calculated that the news from Memphis would deeply wound morale and leave us worried and afraid for our country. Doubtless it boosted our captors' morale, confirming their belief that America was a lost cause and that the future belonged to them. Yet how differently it turned out, and if they had been the more reflective kind, our enemies would have understood that the cause of Dr. King was bigger than any one man and could not be stopped by force of violence. Struggle is rewarded in God's own time. Wrongs are set right.
John McCain there speaking outside the Lorraine Motel to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.